Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. The game's over.
You're listening to CinePunked, interactive discussions for film lovers. This episode, we didn't burn him! I'm Robert J. Simpson.
I'm Rachael Kelly.
And I'm Ben Simpson.
So tonight we are going to be talking about what is unashamedly one of my favourite films, possibly ever. I have to admit, I wrote my MA thesis on this. This is the 1973 Robin Hardy directed film, The Wicker Man, starring Edward Woodward, Christopher Lee, Britt Eklund, Ingrid Pitt, and a host of other people whose names temporarily elude me. But this is a film which has had a longevity, I think, that far probably surpassed its period. It was a troubled production, had a troubled release originally through British Lion in the UK, and it has become something of a landmark, an icon, not only within horror cinema, within cinema itself. Now, Rachael, this is your first time watching The Wicker Man.
Yes, I have just lost my wicker virginity.
So having had your wicker virginity taken, was it a pleasant experience? Was it unpleasant?
It was an experience.
Can I use lines like that?
It was an experience. It wasn't an unpleasant experience. It was occasionally a very confusing experience. I wasn't always certain that I knew what was going on. I had to rewind a couple of times. It's an engaging film. It's never less than completely engaging. It never lost me completely. I think it's very much of its time, certainly. I think it is completely different from anything that we would expect of a horror film, although I don't think one could categorise it as anything other than a horror film as such. I mean, the feeling you're left with at the end is just, it's extremely disturbing. It's extraordinarily disturbing.
What's horror about it?
You don't say it's horrible. I mean, what is it that you expect to have in a horror film?
Blood, guts, I don't know. So scary tension. I don't know.
Okay. So on this note, there is definitely blood within The Wicker Man. There is numerous occasions where we see dismembered parts of the body. We, in fact, do see some guts. They are wrapped around a rowan tree in the graveyard.
Oh, were those guts?
Those are
right,
guts.
okay.
That's her navel string.
Oh, is that what they meant? Ah, okay. Yeah.
So we actually literally have guts on this. We have a severed hand, the hand of glory that is on fire. And ultimately, we have, the best barbecue in horror cinema.
I sort of halfway agree with Ben as well, in that if we were to go through kind of the genre conventions of horror and try and apply those to The Wicker Man, there's a sense of tension all the way through, certainly. I think it relies a lot on what would be considered the norms of 1970s British society, which are they're considerably different from now. I mean, the whole sort of horror paganism is probably something that we would not so much consider as so completely disjunctive to what we're used to. The ending, though, I think the ending just leaves me certainly feeling so unpleasant that, I mean, it's still kind of with me. It's that kind of, ooh, no, didn't like that at all. That's what makes it horror for me, anyway.
I just must be totally
desensitized by modern horror.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
But you do have to look at it within the context of the time. I mean, this is a film it was shot in 1972, released in 1973 originally. So this is a film that is, 45 years old. So this is not a current film. Now, the way that cinema has gone on since then, the way that sort of the censors have changed, the attitudes has all developed. And in its day, in its time, it was quite revolutionary. This is not, so it has the presence of Christopher Lee here, which makes a lot of people assume that this is a Hammer film because it's a British film and it's got Christopher Lee. That is not the case. This is not a Hammer production. Hammer were nowhere near it. But what you have is a film that is coming out at the same time. It's not long after The Exorcist. Films like this, there is a sort of realism that is coming into horror cinema at the time.
Are you calling it realism?
Yes, I probably would. Now, there is an element of we've got a huge part of the supernatural in this, and for me, that's always when you're talking about gothic horror and you're talking about horror, there's a lot of supernatural involved. But it's not just a case of sort of good versus evil. It's not a case of devils and demons. This is actually a case of one religion and another. And I mean, most people would have an understanding that Christianity is a religion that, whether they agree with it or not, it's a religion that they accept as sort of a normality. Paganism is something that I think increasingly we sort of understand as a normality as well, as an alternative in amongst this multi-faith society that we have. But paganism itself is sort of used as this supernatural other.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So and in fact, actually, for most of the film, it is just about the rituals and it's about the beliefs. It's not up until the climax where actually there's something far more sinister really becomes very apparent. And even then, this is not a film that needs the supernatural in order for it to work. That's there in terms of their beliefs, but actually every action that's taken place is a realistic real one.
The supernatural element is very much assumed, isn't it? I mean, it comes down to a question of whether or not you actually believe that these people can perform magic, which is it's part of their religion, it's part of their day-to-day experience of life, but we don't see any magic performed. I mean, the horror is what that religion leads them to believe is acceptable. Which
it's about sacrifice, which is a tenet that most people from any church-going society will recognise. I mean, we talk an awful lot about the Eucharist. Is about this kind of if we're going to get Christian theology, you've got the Eucharist, which is itself the body and blood of Christ. So we've got this idea of human mortal remains, and there's a great discussion between Lord Summerisle and Sergeant Howe, between Christopher Lee and Edward Woodward's characters, over the various tenets of their religion itself and those kind of beliefs. What you've got a lot though is I think it's about the symbolism more than anything else. So we kind of read the mystery and the magic into this by the symbolism and the ritual. But when you think about that symbolism and that ritual are no different really from the symbolism and ritual that happens in Christianity, which is something that most people accept as being, whether they believe it or not, a normal religion, in inverted commas.
And is that something that the film is trying to say, do you think? Is that a conscious decision of the film to kind of hold the two up together and say, look, they're not actually that different? Because I felt very much as though it was othering paganism, in the sense, point and shock horror. Look, these people don't even believe in God. Look, they're teaching children about phalluses, and look, they are performing phallic rituals, and they're dancing around in the nip, and they're having a nice little shag in the graveyard, and they're very sexually loose, and I did feel like, although while I'm certainly not of the opinion, you can back me up or otherwise in this, that we are supposed to look at Edward Woodward's character and go, oh yes, you are definitely our unproblematic hero. He's a bit of a dick, isn't he though? And I don't think we're supposed to look at him and go, actually, yes, you are the bastion of everything that's good, because his performance of that Christianity comes across as extremely isolating, and a bit kind of fire and brimstone. But is that, am I looking at that from a 21st century perspective? Am I missing a 1970s narrative here?
Possibly. I mean, you watched which version of it did you watch?
The director's cut.
The director's cut, okay. So, Ben, which version have you seen? Do you know?
I can't remember. I think it was one of yours. It was in a wooden...
Yeah, the wooden box.
The wooden box.
Yeah, I have about 4 or 5 different copies now of the Wicker Man.
That doesn't surprise me at all. Here, I have about 5 different copies of Blade Runner, so yeah, I can say nothing.
Which version was that?
And there's both versions in there. So the theatrical cut was the one that was originally released in the UK. Now it's about 80-something minutes long. But it basically starts with him arriving on the island. If you watch the director's cut, it's about an extra 11, 12 minutes. And in the director's cut, it actually opens with Howe in Scotland itself. So he's actually in Stranraer Harbour.
That seems familiar.
So he's having a chat with another police officer. They're looking at some graffiti.
I know, though. And I was reading about this. So there is another cut that has those other bits in it, as far as I recall, because the director's cut, maybe I'm wrong. I'm arguing with an expert here, and I shouldn't do that. My understanding was that the sequence where he's actually speaking to the other police officer belongs to a cut that they were never able to fully restore. Am I wrong?
They've never been able to restore the full version of the film.
Okay.
So over the years, it exists in various forms, none of which is totally complete. So depending on which version you watch, there's slight differences in time, slight differences in the order that things happened. I fell in love with the shortest version.
Okay.
And it's the one that people often don't like, but actually for me it makes perfect sense, and it's perfectly enjoyable. The director's cut adds a little bit more. It adds a lot more to Howe's kind of faith. So you actually see him doing a lot more lay preaching.
Well, I saw that there was some the sequence in Scotland were him in the church and receiving the Eucharist. And the one that I saw had the Gently Johnny sequence in it, which I understood was excised from the original theatrical release.
It was
because he was only on the island for 48 hours or something in that.
I did a study this a little while ago. Actually, I think he still ends up being on the island for 3 days.
Okay.
So there is an argument that in the short version, the discussion is always that he's only there for 2 nights. But actually, there is a third night, and there is one night, and whatever it is that they've said, I think someone's missed something.
Okay.
Someone now going to listen to this podcast and tell me I'm talking bollocks. I will go back to it, or I'll cut this bit out. Probably cut this bit out. So there is those scenes with Howe. There's also a scene with him talking to another police officer. There's a bit of graffiti on the wall that says "Jesus saves," and Howe's like, there's a time and a place for that, and let's get it scrubbed off and we'll prosecute. And he's very much seen to be someone who's very religious, but actually towing the line. He believes that things have to happen in a particular way. So he is a very repressed individual who gets thrown into this society that is somewhat more liberated. Now, this is early 1970s. We're after the sexual revolution as well, so this is quite something that was pretty common. But we see the film through his eyes.
But there's never any kind of redemption arc for his character, is there? Which I don't know whether that makes me think more that he is supposed to be this figure of identification, or whether he's supposed to be this extremely uptight person that you're supposed to go, actually, well, I sort of recognise that a little bit, but you're taking it too far there.
I've just had a crazy thought. Do you think he was selected to be put on that island?
Okay, I actually know the answer to this one, but...
Selected by whom? By Lord Summerisle?
To be the sacrifice.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah?
He's selected.
Yeah.
So if you watch the film, basically he receives the letter personally. Now, there's no return address or such, but just it doesn't tell you who it is that sent it as such. But he's told, there's this little girl, this is where she is, and it's sent directly to him. So they have already singled him out as being someone who's very pure, who's of the right faith, and who's a good, honest cop. Now, the island, we know, does have a trade with the mainland. So presumably at some point somebody has witnessed him in person and helped select him for this process. So they bring him over, they actually do invite him to the island. He then has to go through the whole series of rituals in order to end up as the human sacrifice. Spoiler, sorry. So he does go through a series of rituals and challenges. It's a bit like, actually, if you think about it, it's Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. He is going through that same process. This is to prove his purity. So,
so I'm more and more coming around to the idea that, in actual fact, the film doesn't think there's anything wrong with its particular brand of fire and brimstone Christianity.
I think it actually sets both of them as equally valid viewpoints. Now, it doesn't say that one is right and one is wrong. It just says, this is my attitude. Lord Summerisle's, this is my attitude.
Because they're both fairly extreme embodiments of one's religious faith. I mean, for him to go in with that attitude of everything I say is right and everything you do is wrong, versus Lord Summerisle, who is prepared to take his religion to the extent of luring somebody to the island to burn him alive in order to make the crops come back. I mean, it's a study in religious extremism to an extent, isn't it?
And you've got Howe there, he presents it as a very rational argument as well. So Howe then turns around to Lord Summerisle and says, when the crops don't return, when the crops fail again, next year they're going to come for you. And Lord Summerisle's response is, the crops will not fail. And
yeah, but I don't know. I wondered from that sequence.
Is there a sequel to that?
The Wicker Man 2. Where's all the apples?
We're going to come back to that. Rachel, you going to say something?
I did wonder to what extent Lord Summerisle is kind of playing a part at that point, because he did sort of seem, and it's this kind of switching between playing parts and who's really who, and masks and performance and so on and so forth. Is the real Lord Summerisle the guy who stands in his castle and talks to Sergeant Howe about how this is kind of a cynical move by his grandfather in order to get the people to stay here and do the work for him and love him, versus Lord Summerisle, who stands on the cliff edge and goes, the crops will return. Which one does he actually believe?
I think he's somewhere between the two. I think he's both. I think it's this, if you draw the parallel again between that and a regular preacher, you have a preacher who will stand up. We live in Northern Ireland.
We know a thing or two about religious extremism.
So we'll have a preacher who will stand up there and will shout on a Sunday about a fire and brimstone speech about how we're all doomed if we do this, that, and the other. And at the same time, the next day you find that they're off being photographed whilst in the nude in some field with a mistress or whatever, and that's they don't see a kind of a separate. They don't see those two things as being in opposition at all. Like, people do have those two existences. I think that there is, for whatever it is to be for your own end. Okay,
so there's the performative aspect to the performance of faith.
Well, the whole film is about performance when you think about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Yeah.
Like, absolutely. Now, Howe himself we see as a performer because he's up there giving, he's up there doing the Eucharist. He is a lay preacher. So he is giving a performance there. As a policeman, he's putting on a costume and he is as well performing his duties.
Okay.
In the law, so he has to go back and go through a set of things, which means that even when he's being tempted through a very thin wall by a bosomy young
nubile young Swede with a Scottish accent.
Aye, lovely Willow. Whilst he's being tempted by the strumpet, he is still, very aware that he is there acting on behalf of the police force, and so he has his duties, and he cannot then conflict that. And I think it's the policeman's duties probably get to him more actually than being a Christian.
Do you think?
I think he is sorely tempted, and I think
he's clearly sorely tempted, but when
have you ever seen such agony on a man being tempted?
Yeah, that scenery was well chewed.
So I think that is there, but there's him and there's him going through that, but then there's also everybody else, and the whole thing is giving performances. So right from the moment he arrives, so they're already there when he arrives. They're all on the dock shore. So you're asking, was he invited? Yeah, yes, they picked him out. So they're all there waiting. That's his audience. That's his reception. He comes. They all kind of like, oh no, I don't know her. I have no idea who she is. I've never seen her before in my life. And they're all hiding behind boats and things, and note the boat with the big eye on it. The old thing.
I did note the boat with the eye. Well, it was impossible to avoid because the director did make a point of doing more close up of eye. Eye is significant.
The old saying, eye of Horus.
All right, okay.
There's a lot. I'm going to take you back through this film, Ben. There's a lot of symbolism in this film, and a lot of eyes. So there's always the idea that somebody's watching you. You've got the image of Nuada, the sun god, as well. So you've got these eyes in his face that's everywhere. You look at dead rabbits and things like this. There are eyes always watching. The camera often will sit there, hidden behind stuff, like looking through things. So again, you've got this sense that what we're seeing isn't actually Howe's point of view. It's almost like we're getting the view of some other islander who's just off camera that we can't quite see watching things.
Yeah.
And that becomes very apparent in sort of the chase at the end, where he is clearly being watched the whole time.
That was really unnerving, actually. I mean, the chase, although I did know what was coming and I was kind of steeling myself for this is not going to be fun to watch. And I was right, it was not fun to watch at all. I found the chase actually probably one of the most unnerving bits so far, although I tell a lie. Actually, one bit that I thought where I actually felt really unsettled was when Willow is bringing the young man up. She's sexually initiating our young friend, and the entire bar are downstairs singing, but their eyes are trained towards the ceiling. That was really creepy.
So that whole sequence is not in the theatrical cut.
No, I know. And I can see why, but I also think that cutting that demonstrates just how little the studio understood what they were working with.
Well, it adds a whole other element, both to the sense of the inclusiveness of the village. The entire village are in on everything that goes on.
It's almost like a hive mind.
It totally is. And you've got Summerall outside uttering his poem.
Mm-hmm.
In as we watch this close up of two snails mating, Lord Summerall's outside, kind of encouraging them to get on. What's, as you say, this young child is basically has his virginity taken from him, and inside there's got this very tender. I actually find it's a very kind of
tender song, but the way it's being performed it's almost dead-eyed vacancy while they stare up at the ceiling, and it's just really, I mean, I don't quite know how to process that kind of, sense of ritual performed, but almost not disinterested, because it's very, very interested, but in no way focused. It's almost vacant. I just found it really unnerving.
We've been talking a lot on sort of our recent recordings as well. So depending on where you're listening to this, it's either before this episode or after this episode. But we've been talking a lot about kind of, sort of female empowerment as well, and the kind of the Me Too debates. And when you see a film like this, it really sits in a very odd place in terms of how we actually look at that and the representation of sexuality, because actually in many ways Willow she is a very sexually active and provocative character, and whilst she is definitely stripped for the eyes of every male gaze in the place, she also holds all the power.
As a character, I think Willow is incredibly strong. I think as an actress, Britt Eklund is disempowered, and basically completely disempowered, because she's positioned specifically for the male gaze. Look, here are my tits. Look, I am cavorting naked against a door. So I think you have to separate the actress from the character in this particular regard.
We do. I mean, she's more than that. I mean, she's given somebody else's voice and somebody else's bum. So she is completely, Britt Eklund herself is disempowered that way. But I think there's also there's a nice contrast if you watch the sort of the director's cut between the body the body song that we have, The Landlord's Daughter, that the barmen that everyone in the bar is singing about her, and then the Gently Johnny, which is actually a much more kind of you're in control Willow, and then also Willow's How Do.
Yeah.
When she's singing that her own kind of siren song.
Yeah.
To entice Sergeant High. There's an awful lot of interesting. Now, Ben, you are a musician.
Yes.
A lot of this film is about music, and this is where I wish. Before I know that what I should have done was made you listen to the soundtrack before we did this tonight.
Yeah, you probably should have. Yeah, just for a wee refresh.
Oh, fucker. Do you feel comfortable talking about the music at all? Do I need to stick a song on for you?
Yeah, I think so. Does that keep going? Yeah.
Are you sufficiently revived? Not you. Like, what the fuck? I don't remember any of this. Right, listeners, we took a break there to remind Ben of what the Wicker Man soundtrack actually sounds like.
Yep.
You don't remember it, do you?
No, I don't. I think I must have wiped it from my memory.
I can't imagine how anyone could not remember that.
I've been singing that ever since I first saw it.
I know. You just did a rendition while
whilst
we were having a break.
It was a beautiful rendition, listeners. There were gestures involved.
Yes, many gestures.
There were. So I mean, like it's an odd film. I think when we think about it, one of the reasons I think that this film sort of defies easy definition is because that it is a blending of genres. This isn't just a horror film. It is a musical.
Well, didn't the director tell the cast they were making a musical at one point? Did I make that up? Did I feel like I read that somewhere.
It's a very good question. What Robin said to me what Robin Hardy said to me was that he wished that he had been more aware about the music at the time. So he hadn't thought ahead, which meant that they didn't actually release a soundtrack album at the time of the film. And actually, the soundtrack is one of the things that people loved and ended up seeking out for years. So whenever he was planning The Wicker Tree, the sequel, he deliberately planned it as with the music with the view to releasing the score.
Oh, cool.
Shame nobody saw The Wicker Tree.
There are many reasons for that. But as a musician, Ben, as the only formally musically educated one of the three of us,
Yeah.
how does it sit for you?
It's strange.
Like, would that put you off watching a film, or
No. The music kind of reflects sort of, I don't know, what's the right words?
folksy vibe?
Yeah, the folksy vibe, the sort of, you know, I don't know, pagany, you know, dancing round a fire naked, singing, you know, songs to the sun and moon, you know.
A lot of it lyrically is based on Robbie Burns' poems. So he's kind of the main influence, and Robbie Burns isn't, you know, he's venerated a Scottish great poet. He also was quite bawdy himself, which I think people don't really realise.
I did not realise that.
I've a book somewhere. I'll
Never
send you.
studied Robbie Burns. Okay.
He was quite what?
Quite bawdy, quite mucky. The man was filthy.
Oh, right.
So I mean, he's very concerned with sex and sexuality as well. So it makes it does seem to fit in really well with a film that is basically about sex and fertility. I
mean, for me, it sort of sits alongside everything else that's going on, kind of historically around this, socioculturally, I suppose, around this period. I mean, there is that whole folk revival going on. I know there is at least one album in my house, which is one big long experimental kind of folk epic. I'm not going to mention the name of it in case there's a massive fan just goes, oh, don't take that name of this in vain. But there is a lot of that kind of folk revival going on at the time. And I find it really unusual that it creeps into a horror film. I don't actually, because there is, it's ripe for it, but it's ahead of its time, isn't it? I mean, it's well ahead of its time, The Wicker Man.
The only other one I can think of off the top of my head is Last House on the Left. Which David Hess provided a score for, that is also quite folksy at times.
Well, a lot of films, maybe not around this period, but there's a lot of films that then go on to explore the horror associated with the old religions.
This was
73.
Yeah, so it's kind of sort of around the whole hippie flower power kind of.
Yeah, it's just after that kind of that whole awakening of the, you know, the summer love in '69. Yeah. It's the you know, free love. It's the introduction.
Earth Mother kind of.
So it kind of
goes.
Age
of Aquarius.
Kind of goes hand in hand, really. You know, with the time period, I suppose. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think it comes through in a lot of the sort of the culture you look at the time. There's definitely something going on. There's definitely a mood in the air.
Is it threatening at this period, though? Is it still seen as threatening? Because there is a sense where The Wicker Man is kind of exploring that tension, isn't there?
Well, I think for a large part of the film, you're looking at The Wicker Man, you're kind of going, hey, this is cool. These guys are like, you know, very, very loose and free, and they're all like very happy.
They seem a bit mental to me.
They're a wee bit, fair enough, they're a little bit closed as a community, but actually they also seem quite friendly and sociable, and
they're putting frogs in their children's mouths.
I think to an extent there's also an awareness that in certain rural areas, a lot of these traditions actually still lingered on, and they still do.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
You know, I mean, again, we're in Ireland, and you know, there's certain communities in Ireland where you will still hear reference to the traditional cures.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll still find people that wouldn't dream of cutting an ash down and sore throat.
Really?
Mm-hmm. It takes away the throat and it gets the croak instead.
Oh wow, I never heard that one before.
You're going to watch this film all over again.
I'm going to have to watch this film again.
Yeah, I mean, there's an awful lot of that stuff. I don't know, for me it works really well, and I think that it's not... I think almost anything at that time can be threatening. I mean, we've had Rosemary's Baby a few years beforehand, which isn't so much about isn't necessarily just the devil's child or, William and Kate's child. If you're following the memes this week.
Really? Oh dear. Okay. I have not been following the memes this week.
But it's also about children and birth, and there is a fear of that. I mean, this film actually it's partly a fear of it's about economy. Actually, what this film is actually about really isn't even about religion, it's about economy. The economy is going tits up because the crops have failed. They're not going to be able to make any money. This is about how we make our money back, and it's, any means necessary.
Ooh, it's kind of a capitalist critique, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh wow, okay, so this is actually basically quite a socialist left-wing film, for all that it comes at us with a conservative right-wing protagonist. I'm not even going to call him a hero, because I just can't decide that he is the hero, for all that we're asked to look at it through his eyes. I don't think we can map ourselves completely onto Neil Howe. Can we? Even for a 1970s audience?
I think he tests most people. I think that he actually, as you said earlier, is a bit of a dick.
He is a bit of a dick.
He comes across quite aggressively, I think.
I told him to shut up a few times as I was watching it.
I think people find it hard to get into that, but there is a point where I think he gets your sympathy. And
oh, he definitely does, because, at the end of the day, what happens to him is horrific by any measure. And he's incredibly sympathetic as we watch him trying to parse the fact that he is going to die horribly. Yeah, there's something really vulnerable, almost childlike about him, and it's impossible to watch that and not feel deeply disturbed. However we feel about him as a character, but he spends a lot of his time in that film just being a dick. Tell me I'm wrong. We are a Christian country. We don't do things like this.
Again, Northern Ireland, we're very used to this. These arguments, I'm sure I've seen in the news this week. I think he's... possibly that is part of my problem, is that growing up, a lot of what Howe represented was an area that I recognised from my own youth. At the same time, the pagan ways were also something that deeply fascinated me, so I was kind of caught in between the two.
Do you have to give the guy a bit of a break, though? Like, he's been brought up a certain way, and this is how this whole community lives, and he's found himself in that community. So, like, it's not really right for him to be going, this is wrong, or you should be doing that, but...
Which is sort of exactly the point that the film is making.
Yeah.
They are two ideologies, it's two sets of principles that are kind of clashing, and nobody is entirely right. I think, though, we're all pretty certain that burning somebody alive is probably a bad thing.
Well...
I'm not even going to, even as much as I yelled "you're a dick" at the screen multiple times, even I wasn't really gunning for that, to be honest. Maybe, I don't know, kick him in the shin.
What about the cast in this? I feel that we probably need to sort of pay some sort of service to it. Have you worked out yet, Rachel, why it is that I told you to watch this film?
Because we're watching Hot Fuzz, and we're screening Hot Fuzz in a couple of weeks.
Do you see the connection
I
yet?
absolutely see the connection, yeah. I get a lot from Hot Fuzz even without having seen that film, but it really does put the cherry on top. Yeah, it is 100% being, Nicholas Angel is Neil Howe, only slightly less insufferable, and Nicholas Angel gets a redemptive arc. And comes about. I have my own theories. I have many theories about the evolution of masculinity in the Cornetto trilogy, which I'm not going to go into here. But it's certainly. He's very, very much playing Neil Howe for the majority of that film.
We will talk about the comparisons between the Wicker Man and Hot Fuzz very soon in another show.
Yeah.
But the cast for this, is peppered with very distinguished British actors, very recognisable figures, from Brett Eklund and Edward Woodward and Christopher Lee, Ingrid Pitt.
None of them, in fact, Scottish, interestingly.
No, Lindsay Kemp. It's very thin on actual Scottish actors, for whatever reason.
Edward Woodward's accent is quite possible, I say, as somebody who's not Scottish and doesn't have a great ear for it, but it sounded fine to me.
Where was this filmed?
Scotland. Dumfries and Galloway.
Couldn't find a Scottish actor apparently, though.
Wow.
Yeah. That is the way it is. So one of the big debates about this film as well is whether or not this, what is that makes this film actually any good.
Yeah.
So Robin Hardy is the director. Now we talked about auteur theory before, and the idea that the director is the guy who really leads the way. I'm going to argue, I'm going to put this out there myself, that actually this film is not a success because of Robin Hardy.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
I think Robin Hardy's a competent director, but I think that it's the combination of talent that was involved in this film that actually made it the success that it actually was.
Yeah, I mean, you know the film a lot better than I do, Robert, but I have to say, watching the film, I'm not struck by any particular directorial brilliance. In fact, sometimes I feel like the directing is kind of jumping in my face. Particularly, I mean, there's a lot of sort of extreme close-ups that kind of go, look at the thing!
Oh, it is the early 1970s. There's a lot of extreme close-ups at that point.
I'll give you that. I will give you that. But to me, I think if one was to try and isolate the thing that made this film such an enduring success and so passionately beloved by so many fans, I don't think you could point to one single thing. I think you have to point to the fact that everything that goes into it is so bloody unique. I mean, it's a film that stands on its own, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of, at least at its time, I know it's been imitated since, and parodied and homaged and referenced until, ad infinitum. But it's unique. There's nothing like it. It's its own thing. It's unapologetically its own thing. And that's where I say, I feel like it's almost an accident that it turned into what it is. If you were to say, right, okay, we're going to do this film, it's going to have nudity, it's going to have a teeny bit of gore, it's going to have singing, we're periodically going to hold up the narrative and just have some singing, and nobody's going to do anything terrifying until the final sort of 5 minutes or so. Also, there's a dead kid. What person goes, yeah, let's green light that? It's just a complete oddity. It's completely of its time. And while it doesn't quite make me go, yes, I must definitely watch this over and over again, I can absolutely see why people are passionately devoted to it.
I think there's a few things there for me. I realised this week I am very much singing in defence of a film that I love, which is terrible.
Hey, I made you guys watch The Room. What can I say?
Stop bringing it up. Ben's crying already.
No, it's a great film and I love it very much. It's not a great film, but it's a great film.
No, it's not.
It's really not. I think the idea that this is a kind of wonderful mistake is true. I mean, film is an ensemble, and it does take that combination of talents to make something work. So I think you've got a cast that actually predominantly works. They work really well off each other. I think one of the things that often is overlooked is the cinematography.
Okay, yeah.
Which in this is stunning. At various points, but for me, it's always that shot right at the end as the Wicker Man is collapsing against the sunset.
Oh, that's outstanding!
It's like, oh my god, I can't believe they caught that, because this is on film. This is not
unbelievable shot, and so very beautiful, and encapsulates absolutely everything that the film is talking about in that one shot. Absolute economy. I mean, that is absolute cinematic greatness happening in front of your eyes right there.
Harry Waxman was an excellent cinematographer. I think the score is fantastic, and actually, I mean, a lot of the music in this film is also diegetic.
Yes, which is the weirdest thing.
So you understand diegetic and non-diegetic, Ben?
Refresh my memory.
I can't remember if we talked about this already on the show. The idea of diegetic music is music that happens within the actual context of the film. So if you've got a scene and you're going into a ballroom and the people are playing ballroom music, that's your diegetic music. It's music that actually comes within the world of the film.
Right, yeah.
Non-diegetic music is that sort of music that composers stick over the top of the film to kind of go,
okay.
This is how you feel, you will be scared.
Right,
In my seminars, I play a little game of diegetic or non-diegetic with my students. It's a laugh a minute. Everyone loves it when I do that.
So most of the music in this film is diegetic, and I think that's one reason why it works. It all lives within that film. You know, it's the music of the people, it's the music of the countryside that gives it its slightly uneasy quality, even to the point where you've got that funereal march at the end. This is actually the music that they're playing, which is also, I have to say, one of the reasons why I loathe the Neil LaBute remake. Where
I thought that didn't happen.
It shouldn't have. I actually paid to see that. It was that bad.
Did you?
I did. I was writing my thesis at the time. But
dear.
The thing about that film is that they have some of those processions and that diegetic music, and they then stick a score on top of it.
Right.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I've never seen it. So
they've completely missed what makes that
point.
Eerie. Then they've just completely. Oh, that's just... Neil LaBute's a competent director. What's going on there?
Why would they do that?
I actually have no idea, but it completely ruins the whole vibe. So you've actually got what kind of makes it the Wicker Man, and then they go and stick something else on.
Because the whole point of it is that it's so weird that it's happening. I mean, it's so very much of the sort of hippy dippy islanders who are a little bit sinister and a little bit odd and a little bit living in a completely separate world, all of their own, that they just periodically break into song. They sing a song about how Willow's easy, and then they sing a lovely song about how your man's loses virginity upstairs, and then she sings a little "I'm going to seduce you" song now, and it's just accepted. It's just what you do when you live on Summerall. You just periodically break into song. If you then put a score over that, it's like going, ha, look at the thing these people do, but here, we're going to stick more music on top of that because I've completely misunderstood why that was good in the first place. That annoys me.
And so it should do. The Wicker Man, I think, at essence, though, isn't even a horror film. It's not even a musical. It's actually just a murder mystery. It is a thriller about a missing girl. This is a detective drama as well.
Do you think people call it a horror because of Christopher Lee?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think, well, and it's a human sacrifice.
That too. Yeah. I mean, that is
and
quite
the blood
horrific.
and guts and stuff that you said earlier.
The severed human hand being set on fire and stuff.
Yeah.
Slightly horrifying.
The missing girl.
Yes. Rowan.
Is she actually missing?
No.
Well, she is. Well, she's not present for most of it, and it is heavily implied that she's dead or about to be sacrificed, which is pretty horrific too.
She's been the suggestions that she's been reborn. There's a lot of subterfuge in it. So she. There's a bit where he's asking, "Have you seen this girl?" And he passes around the photograph. "No, I've not seen her. No, I don't recognise her at all. No, I've never seen her. What's her name?" There's a lot of deliberate obfuscation. They're trying to hide what they know about her and about her. But everybody in this film is a complicit player. Even Howie, without realising it, he's the unwilling fool, but he is a complicit player in what happened. He voluntarily ends up being part of the whole mess.
Yep.
But for me, this is a detective thriller as well. So this actually came on a double bill originally with Don't Look Now, which for me is like the best double bill of films ever. It's my kind of other favourite film.
I don't think I've seen that.
Don't Look Now. I'm going to make you watch this one.
It is. I saw it even though the ending had been spoiled for me long ago, and I was still terrified by that film.
Don't spoil it for me because I haven't seen it.
No, I'm not spoiling it.
We might actually have to have it as an event, or I'm going to have to
definitely have to do that.
Or I'm going to sit you down. We're going to watch it before we do a podcast at some point.
Okay.
Did I mention I saw Don't Look Now on my honeymoon for the first time? It's a honeymoon kind of film.
It definitely is.
Really not.
But so
they were both billed together,
double billed, so one after the other. But also, I mean, without going into spoilers for Don't Look Now, I mean, Don't Look Now is also very much a kind of about an absent girl, and it's a bit of a mystery, and it's a bit of a chase film as well.
It's also kind of a culturally situated horror. Yeah.
So
okay.
it's an interesting double bill watching them back to back. But this is also, I think, the other party in this is not just Robin Hardy; it's Anthony Schafer, who's the screenwriter of this. Now, Schafer had also... Have you seen any of his other work?
I have not.
So
no.
Schafer also...
I read about the proposed follow-up to The Wicker Man. That's an interesting...
Well, two Schafer's... two Schafer films that I love. Sleuth, which...
Oh,
so Sleuth,
okay.
Sleuth is Schafer. Sleuth is basically... It's a cop film. It's also a bit of... There's an awful lot of... it's another mystery. There's more confusion, and things are not always what they seem. It seems to be a thing that really he gets into quite well.
Yeah,
it's Michael Caine and Laurence Olivier in the film. Something I'd love to do as a play one day. There's a play version of it. The other one is Frenzy. Hitchcock's Frenzy is a Tony Schafer film as well.
I didn't know that either. Okay,
so again, you got a bit of murder, you got a bit of mystery, you got a kind of a chase, and mistaken identities and things as well. So I think this is actually Schafer's film. It's not Robin Hardy's. Now Robin Hardy, I knew Robin slightly, so kind of when I talk about him and about his films, I think it's fair to say that his films were not amazing always. The Fantasist I quite like. It was at one point regarded as the worst film ever to come out of Ireland.
It's got some competition.
It does. It's not that bad, but it definitely has a bad reputation. And The Wicker Tree. So he only really did the sort of 3 films. The Wicker Tree is an attempt to follow up The Wicker Man. So Christopher Lee was meant to kind of play the kind of the starring kind of Lord Summerall character again, but he was filming Hammers the Resident in New Mexico, tripped over a cable and bust his back, and wasn't able to shoot the whole part, so they had to recast. It would have been Christopher Lee, Joan Collins, and Sean Astin that were in that film as well. And Ewan McGregor was lined up for a cameo.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Suddenly you've got a cast that actually makes it sound far more interesting and something that actually you could have bought into, but ultimately they went for people who maybe were not so well known. I think the idea of it, I'll write a piece about this at some point. I think it's a competent enough idea. Plays a lot of the same themes, but it doesn't have that magic combination of talent that The Wicker Man does.
Yeah, I mean, that's an exceptional cast. And they're having a lot of fun with it as well, by the looks of things. They are enjoying the material. Christopher Lee particularly does seem to be sort of going. I mean, I know he was the idea behind it was, I don't want to be typecast in Hammer horror sort of. I want to kind of break out from that. So what I will do is I will be in another horror film.
With a mad wig.
With a mad wig. It is mad. It's brilliant. The last sequence where he's on the cliff and his hair is just going dandelion. It's fabulous. I love it.
Yeah, Lee was basically one of the big supporters of the film. So this film really only found its place in the end of the 1970s. It did a bit like Rocky Horror.
Yeah.
It ended up finding its market in going from cinema to cinema across the US.
On Blade Runner.
Lee actually went round with Robin Hardy, and they basically went to each of the towns that it was playing in, and they did personal appearances and stuff and tried to encourage people to come out, and that's where it kind of got its cult status from. Not much later on now. It is quite well respected today, but at the time it was this long, slow build. Lee had, I think, invested in it as well.
Well, he worked for free, I think, didn't he?
Yeah. So it's an interesting film. So I could go on talking about The Wicker Man all day. I just wanted to make sure that you'd watched it because we're doing a live event in a couple of weeks on Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, and it is actually, I'm really glad that I saw that in advance of the Hot Fuzz screening. It really does deepen. I mean, I love Hot Fuzz. It's one of my all-time favourites. Edgar Wright, I think, is one of the greatest genre directors working currently or perhaps ever. And I think Hot Fuzz is pitch perfect. Having seen The Wicker Man, I've now got a whole new layer of understanding of Hot Fuzz and where it's coming from. So yeah, much as you will eventually thank me for introducing you to the room, thank you for introducing me to The Wicker Man.
We'll do that one. We're going to record that's a live event. We're going to record that and we're going to issue it as a podcast in a few weeks as well. I do feel that's the one thing that we didn't really get into was in the kind of the remakes and the reimaginings and the kind of the tributes that have been paid to The Wicker Man. I mean, it has become one of those things when people talk about keep reading this, when people talk about things being a bit Wicker Man-y, we sort of know what they mean. It's about these little weird local communities that are...
I knew what they meant even without having seen the film. That's how resonant the film is within popular culture. That sequence at the end is iconic, whether or not one has seen the film. So yeah, I would agree. It's absolutely under the cultural skin.
I think we talked about Hot Fuzz. I think we talked about The League of Gentlemen kind of playing off on it as well, which Ben needs to watch at pain of death.
Yeah.
I was dragged to it and I ended up loving it.
There's if you haven't heard it, since we talked about music as well, there's a band called Candidate, and they did an album called Noada, and it's basically an alternative Wicker Man soundtrack.
Ooh.
My friend Graham Duff used one of their themes as the theme tune for Ideal, the BBC Three sitcom.
Okay.
Which was how I got into it. I didn't realise that they'd done this. The other thing, you may remember the Radiohead song from I think a year or two ago.
Yes,
That's right. That Burn the Witch?
Yeah,
it's like Trumpton meets the Wicker Man.
I kind of write Radiohead completely out of my immediate life.
Yeah,
so.
It's not really a band I listen to.
The video is awesome.
I have heard that the video was basically a shot-by-shot remake of The Wicker Man.
Yeah, it's Trumpton meets the Wicker Man.
Trumpton meets the Wicker Man. Actually, I kind of need to see that.
Trumpton?
No, Trumpton meets the Wicker Man.
We'll post that up on the website at some point over the next week.
We should.
I think I'll stick a load of these on so people can scroll back, and we'll do a page on the website that just combines all these influences. And the Muppet Wicker Man, have you seen that?
I have not seen that, but I'm gonna.
How have I not shared the Muppet Wicker Man with either of you?
First thing I'm going to do when I get home.
It's like this comic book version of the Wicker Man told with the Muppets instead.
Oh, cool.
And it kind of makes you think, I really wish that they would stop doing things like, Muppets Wizard of Oz. I want to see the Muppet Wicker Man. Let's go really, really dark with the Muppets for a change.
Oh, what about the Muppet Hostel?
Ooh, Rachel, you're a silly, twisted girl.
I am. Let's make it happen. Kickstarter.
I'm not sure Disney will be very keen on that one.
No, I don't think so.
I don't know. I feel like I'm the only person with imagination sometimes.
So look, I'm glad you kind of watched this. As I say, I could talk about this a lot. I wrote my MA thesis on this, and at some point I will have to share some of the ramblings that I've got on that. We will stick some stuff up on the website. So if you haven't already, we are at www.cinepunked.com. You'll also find us on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll probably find our way onto other social media at some point. So do give us a follow, do give us a like. You'll find out more about our podcasts, our live events, and whatever else we decide to throw into the mix.
And you can just argue with us about whether or not we're right about things.
I'd love to have some more discussions with our readership, because it's always entertaining.
Yeah,
when we do get them. So basically that's us for tonight, or for today, or for this morning, or if you're an insomniac. That weird mystical world in between the two.
yeah.
So thanks as ever for listening, and I will remind you of the voices that you've heard. I am Robert J. Simpson.
I'm Rachael Kelly.
I'm Ben Simpson.
And tune into us again very, very soon. And if you don't already, give us a what's the thing on iTunes? Subscribe to us on your chosen podcast distributor of choice, please. And if you are subscribed or listening and you like what you've heard, give us a review. If you don't like what you've heard, write nasty letters to us instead.
Or tweet us.
Nastily. Until the next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Come. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
I didn't burn him!